There are borders no compass has ever charted, and the wanderer in this story crossed every one of them. No one remembers his name, only that he carried a single question the whole way, turning it over in his mind through every storm and silence. What truly guards the darkness at the edge of the world? The answer waited for him at 6 thresholds, and each one demanded a price he hadn't expected to pay. The first threshold was the northern sea, where fog thickened until it swallowed the horizon whole and turned the water the color of old iron. Scandinavian fishermen had a name for those waters, the domain of the Kraken, not quite a monster so much as a reminder that the ocean never belonged to men in the first place. The wanderer heard that when the Kraken rose, it needed no reaching tentacle to do harm. It simply breathed, and that single breath carved whirlpools wide enough to pull down entire fleets, masts and all, without a sound loud enough to warn the next ship over. Stranger still was the sweetness that drifted from wherever it slept, a scent that drew fish into great gleaming shoals near the surface, tempting even the most cautious sailors back to those same waters, season after season, gambling their lives for one more full net. Standing on a cliff above that gray water, the wanderer understood the first lesson wasn't about the creature at all. It was about the men who kept returning to it, who called the danger worth it every single time. That was the first threshold, the thin, trembling line between hunger and wisdom. From the sea, the wanderer turned south, toward a land where marble seemed to grow like some strange, silent garden, pale shapes half buried in dust and vine. There, the story didn't begin with a monster. It began with a woman. Before she became a terror, Medusa served in Athena's temple, and by every account she was radiant, devoted, careful with small rituals of her faith. Then one day another god took what was never his to take, and the goddess, rather than punishing the one who had done wrong, turned her fury on the one who had suffered it instead. Her hair became serpents that never stopped moving. Her gaze turned to cold stone, and from then on, Medusa lived alone on a windswept island, cursed by the very beauty that had once been hers to be proud of. The wanderer stood before the last statue she left behind, a man frozen mid-stride with his arms still raised as though reaching for something, and asked himself who the real monster in that story truly was. He thought of Perseus, who never dared look at her directly, who used nothing but a polished shield to face her. And it struck him that sometimes the only way to survive someone else's pain is to look at it sideways, through a reflection, because meeting it head-on would turn anyone to stone. The third threshold waited in the frozen forests of the north, where the cold had a weight to it, where every breath the wanderer took hung visible in the air like a warning. The Algonquin peoples called what lived there the Wendigo, and they never taught their children to fear its claws or its teeth first. They taught them to fear the greed already living inside themselves. The Wendigo doesn't hunt right away. It waits, patient as winter itself, for someone to cross the last line of sharing and restraint. A hoarded meal, a broken promise, a moment of taking more than was needed while someone else went without. Once that line is crossed, it slips inside them, growing larger with every bite they take, hungrier with every meal that should have satisfied them but never does. The wanderer heard it said that a person consumed this way keeps their own face for a long time, long enough that no one around them notices what they've become until it's far too late. He understood then that this wasn't a curse from somewhere outside a person. It was a mirror held up in the coldest place imaginable. Farther east, near the gates of Thebes, another creature asked questions instead of attacking. The Sphinx didn't kill out of hunger. She killed because her pride couldn't bear being questioned, because every traveler who failed her riddle proved, in her mind, that she was untouchable. Lion's body, eagle's wings, a woman's face carved into something regal and merciless. She sat at that crossing year after year, watching the road for anyone clever enough to answer her riddle, about the creature that walks on 4 legs at dawn, 2 at midday, and 3 by evening. When Oedipus finally spoke the answer aloud, calm and unhurried, the Sphinx didn't roar or lunge. She simply let herself fall from the cliff, quietly, without another word, as though the answer had taken something from her that no weapon ever could. The wanderer realized something in that silence. Sometimes the strongest among us don't fall because they're defeated in battle. They fall because they lose the one thing that gave their strength any meaning at all. The 5th threshold led him into the frozen homeland of the northern gods, where a wolf pup was raised among those who feared it before it had done anything to earn that fear. Fenrir wasn't born an enemy. He was made into one, piece, by prophecy, and by the growing distrust of the very gods who had once fed him from their own hands. When they finally bound him with a magical chain woven from the sound of a cat's footsteps and the beard of a woman, the price was Tyr's own hand, offered inside the wolf's jaws as a promise the god already knew he'd have to break. Fenrir kept his silence for 1,000 years after that, waiting without complaint for Ragnarok, for the one day the chain would finally give. The wanderer found himself wondering, walking away from that place, how many monsters in every story ever told are really just children raised by other people's fear of them. And the final threshold wasn't in any forest or ocean. It was in a quiet old quarter of Prague, narrow streets and low doorways, where clay had been shaped into the form of a man and woken with sacred letters carved into his forehead. The golem wasn't made to cause harm. He was made to protect, to stand between a community and those who wished to erase them from their own city. But a being with no soul of its own, no will beyond the exact letter of its instructions, sooner or later becomes something even its own creator has to fear. Because a command followed too literally can do as much damage as one ignored entirely. The wanderer stood outside the attic where legend says the golem still lies, deactivated but intact, waiting for an order that will never come, and understood something simple and unsettling. Power without conscience is always the most dangerous threshold of all, more dangerous than any teeth or claws he'd encountered so far. 6 thresholds, 6 lessons, and the wanderer finally had his answer to the question he'd carried since the beginning of his journey. It was never claws, or tentacles, or a cold breath moving through a snow-buried forest. What truly guards the darkness at the edge of the world are the parts of ourselves we're too afraid to look at directly. Greed, envy, a hunger with no bottom, wounded pride, inherited fear, and power left unchecked. Maybe that's why these stories have survived for thousands of years, retold in 100 different tongues around 100 different fires. Not because we're afraid of monsters, but because, somewhere in each of them, we're afraid of what we'd see if we looked at ourselves too closely. If one of these 6 thresholds gave you pause tonight, leave a comment and tell me which one, and where you think this journey should lead next. And if you want to keep crossing borders like these with me, stay a while, subscribe, and let's find the next threshold together.